أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد والثناء لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على سيدنا وعظيمنا وحبيب قلوبنا وشفيع نفوسنا بالقاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته.
So continuing on from last night, first and foremost, I wanted to just clarify one thing. A couple of the brothers and the elders pointed out something that's quite important that I didn't quite clarify. And that is, remember these two concepts that I was speaking about? So the intellect, that which works with the evidences and so on and so forth. I'm symbolizing this with the brain. Likewise, that faculty that works with, for example, emotions and belief and action, I symbolize that with the heart. Now, this is not to say that literally those things are found in the physical heart and the physical brain. I'm not saying that at all. I'm speaking on a totally different level. I'm only using these to suggest as visual aids something that I can point to so you understand the concept that I'm talking about immediately without having to explain it every single time. So I'm not saying, for example, belief is literally found in this heart, found in your body, on the left side of your chest. No. What I'm saying is when I'm talking about belief and actions and that things that we have option in, I'm just going to be pointing over here to that heart. Does that make sense? Is that clear for everyone? Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. The
second thing is the relationship between the two. I don't think I completely captured that last night because I ran out of time. So I'm just going to try and encapsulate that within one story within the Quran, because I think it captures it probably one of the best ways possible. And that's the story of the magicians. The magicians in the time of Musa alayhi salam and Fir'aun. Now, I'm going to be as concise as possible. I'm assuming that a lot of you guys already know the story or have heard about it. But essentially, the magicians were called by Fir'aun because Fir'aun was accusing Musa alayhi salam of what? Of being a magician, of being a sorcerer. So to disprove him, he said, you know what, I'm going to get our best magicians to disprove that Musa is actually a prophet of God and he's just another magician. So those magicians that he called, who actually do magic, meaning illusions, he gathered them in this festival or whatever you want to call it, this battle, and he said to them, do your best in proving that this person is just a magician and not even the best of magicians. You guys are better than him, so defeat him. Now the magicians at this point in time had not necessarily seen the miracles of Musa. At this point in time, do they believe in Musa as a prophet? No. They've heard that he is some sort of a prophet, but in the meantime, Fir'aun is claiming to be what? A God, nay, the greatest God. Ana rabbukum al-a'la, I am the greatest of all the gods. Now here the magicians are inclined to be favorable to who? To Fir'aun. And they said, if we defeat, or when we defeat Musa, what is our reward? He says, you guys will have, a lot of gold, a lot of treasures, and you'll be from the muqarrabin, you'll be from the close ones to me, meaning you'll have a high ranking position in my governorship. Mind you, this is the exact same thing that Yazid and the governors were telling all the other people in the battlefield. Remember? They said, what is our reward for killing Imam al-Hussein, defeating Imam al-Hussein? You'll get this, you'll get that in the dunya. So just keep this parallel in mind while I'm telling you this story. I can't focus on it too much because of the limited time that I have. Now, the magicians, back to the magicians. At this point, did they believe in Musa? No. Are they considered kafirin? This is the important question. Are they considered the ones that rejected Musa? Technically, they weren't believers of Musa. However, did they have the evidences to say that this is actually the prophet of God? Yes. No, they had just heard that he was a prophet, but they hadn't seen any of those miracles yet. Therefore, at this point in time, was this, meaning the heart, that faculty which you can use for belief, following the evidences? At this point in time, they had no evidence that he was a prophet. Now, I'll be proving this inshallah soon. So afterwards, Musa and these magicians went basically into a battle. First, the magicians did their magic, And Musa was quite frightened. Allah comforted him. And he said, throw your staff. He threw the staff, and that staff turned into what? A snake. Now, at this point in time, there was new evidences presented to who? To the magicians. Now, this is where there's a conflict, a tension. Okay, there's a tension between this and this. Because at this point in time, their belief was that Fir'aun is probably someone powerful, maybe a god, who's going to give us a lot of things. But there has come new evidences suggesting this guy might actually be speaking the truth. He might be a prophet, and this guy's just a fraud. Fir'aun is just a fraud. Now, they could have said, you know what, maybe he's just got new magic that we haven't seen, or so on and so forth. Of course, a lot of the time we do the same thing. However, what did they do when they saw that Musa had performed the miracle? Immediately they fell down in prostration. They fell down in prostration and said, we believe in the Lord of Musa and Harun. Why? Because this faculty, the heart, submitted and obeyed the logic and the intellect. Therefore, they cannot be considered kafirin. Because previously, did they have the evidences? Did they have the hujjah? No. When the hujjah came, did they submit? Yes, they did. Is this being clear? Now, likewise, Fir'aun had more evidences to prove that he was. Because previously he saw the miracles of Musa, but he said, you know what, this is magic. Therefore, I'm going to get the experts. I'm going to get the experts to come and prove that this guy is just a magician. This is similar to the concept of marja'iyah as well, referring to the experts. Now the experts now tell him he's not a magician anymore. This guy is a prophet of God. So now there's more evidence for Fir'aun to accept that Musa is a prophet. But what did he do? He didn't accept. Ahsant. This is what is called cognitive dissonance. There's a tension between what he's believing and what he's doing, and what his intellect is telling him what you should be doing. Okay? So therefore, he rejected him, and this is what they say, that an inferiority complex. He acted in a way to ease this tension between the heart and the brain, and he started getting really aggressive, just like we do. When somebody proves us wrong, what do? We start getting a little bit angry, don't we? We start getting a little bit aggressive. Once we start getting aggressive, things get out of hand. This is why Imam Ali describes, when you're angry, it's like you've lost your mind. Because you're not even looking at this faculty anymore. This is doing whatever it likes. Okay? Now, Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. He starts threatening the magicians and start making excuse for himself. He's trying to ease this tension, and he's saying, you guys are just trying to overthrow me and cause fasad in the land, and so on and so forth. Then the plagues came, correct? Several disasters happened to the people of Egypt, and things like plagues and locusts and all that came. Now we know for sure that Fir'aun and his followers knew that Musa was a prophet. Why? Because when these plagues came, what did they do? They said to Musa, call upon your Lord to remove this plague from us. If you do, then we will believe in you. This is like the challenge that I issued to the doctors yesterday. Bring your doctor's license. Remember? If you bring it, then I'll believe in you. When they brought it, did I believe in them? No. Likewise, Musa then made the supplication to his Lord. The plague was removed. Did they believe? No. Absolutely not. Evidence after evidence after evidence, rejection and denial after denial, until the water overtook them and they were drowned. This is when this is not in submission to this. What we want this is what we need to strive for, brothers and sisters, a harmony between this faculty and that faculty. The belief and actions need to be in harmony with our mind, our intellect, our logic. This is what we need to strive for, and this is the height of Iman. By the way, we always go against it. We always go against it. I don't think anyone here is saying all the time, my heart is in submission to my mind. Simple example, when you sin, and you know that this is a sin, your mind and logic and evidences is telling you, don't do this. But what's your heart saying? What's your actions doing? It's going, do it again. You're going against it. This is called, again, cognitive Dissonance. Don't worry about the word, but basically it means there's a tension between your actions and behavior and what you know you should be doing. Smokers is a good example. This is the example they usually give. I know smoking is bad, but I still smoke. So what they start to do, to ease that tension, they make excuses. For example, smokers will say, that's okay. I know it's not good for me, but it's just one per week. Likewise, when we sin, what do we say? It's only one small sin. We start justifying it so that tension is eased a little bit. Or we might say, I'm sinning so much that another sin is not going to matter anymore. Correct? Or some of us might say, it's okay, I'll sin now on the 10 nights of Muharram. I'll shed a few tears and I'll be entered into heaven. Salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
So obviously we are trying to avoid this tension between our actions, between our beliefs, and what is telling us logically with the evidences, do and don't do, correct and not correct. Remember, this is not optional, while this one is optional. Ahsantum. Now, what I want to focus on a little bit is this side of the equation, the intellect, the evidences. I want to focus on this probably the next 2 nights. With this, it's important to understand that the intellect for each and every one of us is different. Not everyone's is the same. There is a famous narration found in both schools of thought where the Prophet, peace be upon him, he says, ومنا معاشر الأنبياء أن نكلم الناس بقدر أو على قدر عقولهم. All the prophets, he's speaking about the prophets, all of the prophets were ordered by Allah to speak to people with respect to their intellect. The Prophet and all the prophets, but especially our Prophet, they are the heights of intellect. The intellect, if you could put a cap on it, they would be up there. Our Prophet, in fact, is described as the intellect, the first intellect, the original intellect. Now, does the Prophet or the prophets, do they speak to the people based upon their intellect or based upon the people that they're speaking to? Ahsan, the people that they're speaking to. In fact, on a practical level, why is there a program for everyone here and another program over there? Why don't we just have everyone over here? What's the difference?
For the intellect of people.
Ahsan, for the intellect of the people. The people in here have, generally speaking, I don't want to say every single one of us, we have a greater intellect than the ones in there. Not because we're smarter. No, I'm not saying we're smarter and they're dumber. What I'm saying is the young ones are still developing their intellect. And their experiences now are limited to things like colouring in simple stories. You all have experienced these things. And your intellect has developed and been trained to now understand more complex topics. I can't be talking about these sort of things with them over there. They'll tell me, Ammu, leave me alone, I need to colour in this ship. Is that not correct? Zin. Now, the intellect and the different types of intellect and the separation and differentiations can be seen on multiple levels. For example, when we look at mankind as a whole through all generations and all times, from the time of Adam alayhi salam until our time today, the intellect levels are different. We would hope that the intellect back in those days were at its primitive stage, and today it's at the height of the intellects of mankind. It might not be, but that's what we hope. But we know that the way that the prophets in previous times spoke to people was different to the times of other prophets, and today we would hope it's different as well. If there were a prophet to come, would he speak to us the same way that the previous prophets spoke to us, or in a different way? I'll give you a simple example. Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam. At that time, what were they worshipping? They were worshipping idols, stars, the moon, the sun. The way that he spoke to them in disproving them was very logical and suitable for their time. He would say, okay, you want to worship the stars? Okay, let's worship the stars. This star is my God. Then what happened when the star sets? He says, how can this be a God if it's setting? No, in fact, I want to worship this thing. I want to worship the moon. This makes more sense. Then the moon set, and then the sun came up. He said, oh, this one's even bigger. I'm going to worship the sun. And then when the sun set, he says, I'm not going to worship anything that rises and sets. I'm going to worship the one that made these things rise and set. Now, these guys went into that defensive mode and angry mode and so on and so forth because they couldn't argue with him in a manner that could refute him. Now, imagine using those very same arguments today. Let's get your average atheist and you say, okay, you don't believe in God? You see that star? I worship that star. Is it going to work with the average atheist? They'll probably look at you and say, what? Are you living 1400 years ago, 1500 years, 1800 years ago? And this is the problem, brothers and sisters, when our youth come to us and ask us the difficult questions. Maybe in the older generations, these questions weren't asked. Allah says do this, we do this. Baba says do this, we do this. But we're living in an age now where everyone is encouraged to question. Now when they come and question, we say, Habibi, don't ask too many questions, just do it. And if you don't do it, you're going where? To the hellfire. By the way, it's not if you do this, inshallah, you'll get heaven and you'll get paradise. No, if you don't do this, you're going to hellfire. Well, who wants to worship a God that threatens people without reasoning? And we wonder why our youth are not interested in our religion. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ala
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
How much more? Zen. And one other interesting point. So we said the arguments change, and you'll find even within the time of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, when Prophet Muhammad came, the way that things were argued is different to when, for example, Imam al-Rida argued with them. The arguments that he taught, for example, Abu Dhar, was similar in the sense that he would put a cup of milk in front of an idol to see if that idol would drink the milk, and you'll see a fox come and you'll say, no, it doesn't make sense. But in the time of Imam al-Rida, if you look at the narrations and his debates with the atheists, these debates were on a different level. Why? Because by the time of Imam al-Rida, the Islamic Empire and the Arab Empire had been elevated in terms of their intellect. So by that time, the arguments were different and more developed. You won't find these arguments back in the earlier days. And you'll find somebody asks the Imam, how can you fit the whole world in an egg? One Imam will answer different to another Imam. I don't want to get into it because I don't have time. Why did they answer different, by the way? Because in that time the intellect was one level, and then there was another level for this Imam. Correct? Making sense? Now, one thing that's quite interesting is somebody asked Abul Hassan III, which would be Imam al-Hadi alayhi salam, our 10th Imam. So 10 generations after the Prophet, or 11 generations. Somebody said, why was there different miracles for different prophets? Why was there different miracles to different prophets? Because in the time of, for example, Musa, what was prevalent and important at that time? Magic. In the time of Isa alayhi salam, what was important? Health. So Isa brought that as a miracle. In the time of Nabi Muhammad, what was it? Eloquence and sermons and poetry. So what was his miracle? Through his eloquence, his sermons, and the Quran, of course. Now, what's interesting in this narration, and the companion was convinced, but he said, okay, that was a hujjah for their time. A hujjah means an evidence that the experts would appreciate. Back then, when people heard the Quran, even the enemies were mesmerized, right? Some of the enemies were so in love with the Quran, the enemies of the Prophet, they would sneak outside the house of the Prophet and listen to the Quran, right? And what would happen, you'll have one enemy hiding in one bush and another enemy hiding in another bush, and all of a sudden when they come to listen to the Prophet in the middle of the night, they bump into each other. What are you doing here? What are you doing here? Because they didn't want to be seen listening to this beautiful eloquence. Now, in the time of the 10th Imam, he asks Imam al-Hadi, the companion asked Imam al-Hadi, what's the hujjah for the people of today? What's the evidences, the undeniable evidences to prove the truth today? You would think it's still the Quran, right? The Quran is the everlasting miracle. But in reality, is it? Now, I don't deny that the Quran is a miracle. In its eloquence, it cannot be matched. In its style, it cannot be matched. In its Arabic, it cannot be matched. But can we say the people in the time of the Prophet and their intellect and appreciation for the language and eloquence is the same as, for example, today? How many of us here can actually appreciate the Quran to the fullest extent? Most of us here only speak English. And as for the ones who speak Arabic, do we speak the Arabic of the Quran or the Arabic of the Arabs of today? I mean, me in the car speaking to Sheikh Nami, for example, may Allah preserve him. He's speaking Lebanese Arabic, I'm struggling to understand him. I speak Iraqi Arabic, he says, what kind of language is this? It's different language. Now the Arabic of the Quran today, can it really be appreciated in an era where we're limited to 140 characters and our vocabulary is limited to lol and all these words that are... We don't... The president of the greatest, most powerful country in the world can't even complete a Twitter post without making a million mistakes and fallacies. And we want this world to appreciate the Quran. So he asked Imam, what is the evidence, the undeniable evidence for people to refer to for this time? And I believe it's for all times until Al-Hujjah comes. What is it? He says it's the intellect. The intellect. The intellect has developed enough that we can differentiate truth from falsehood. Ahsant Habibi. If I had a few coins, I would give you. After the program, come see me. You're finishing my lecture for me, alhamdulillah. Now I forgot where I am. Where was I? Ahsan. More coins. So the intellect is able to differentiate between truth and falsehood. Now tell me, within our religion, within the way that we portray our religion, are we developing in a way that the intellect is becoming the hujjah? Like I said, when the children come and ask us these questions, are we even able to answer these questions? And you know the problem? I didn't mention this, but the story of Ibrahim, I'm not saying that it's not relevant anymore. On the contrary, the way that we use the ayat that Ibrahim alayhi salam dealt with the mushrikeen, we need to extract the essence of that and apply it today. What was the essence? How much time do I have? 7 minutes. He extract the principles from that. What did he do? He understood the arguments that they were making. And this is the first mistake that we make today. When we hear somebody start talking that doesn't fall in line with our beliefs, what do? Straight away we reject it. We don't even want to hear their argument. We're looking for ways of pointing out faults so we can prove our belief. The first thing we need to do is understand their argument. Once we understand their arguments, we apply the principles that is relevant and viable for them. And can I talk to a Christian, for example, or an atheist and convince them by reading out ayat of the Quran? He's going to say, Habibi, what am I going to do with this book? Tell me something that I believe in first. Therefore, we have to understand their arguments and use their own tools against them. For example, the Shia often refer to Sahih al-Bukhari, for example. And unfortunately, we sometimes know their books better than our own books because we're more concerned with proving them wrong than proving ourselves right. Because we feel more comfortable seeing everyone else wrong than seeing ourselves right. It's much easier, huh? But we don't refer to Bukhari and those books to understand our religion and how we should act and how we should behave as an evidence for us. No, we're trying to use their evidences, what's viable for them. Correct? Now, likewise, when we look at the arguments of the atheists and the Christians, and I sincerely believe with our Christians and Jewish brothers, anyone who is a believer in God, we need to come together, by the way, not be working against each other. Because right now, the strongest power against us is atheism, honestly. That's taking away our youth. And that's because we're not even thinking about, we're more concerned about disunity between each other. Honestly, we're trying to, my sect against your sect. My marja' versus your marja'. If we only knew what our kids were concerned with our youth is concerned with, we would not be worrying about those things. So we need to understand their arguments, use their tools, and use our intellect. We need to develop with the world. The world is moving. Sayyid Sistani, may Allah preserve him, he says in one of his books, Al-Rafid fi Ilm al-Usul, he says there's a tension at the start. He says there's a tension between the Islamic world and all other sciences in the world. Politics is developing. Philosophy is developing. The world economics is developing. While we're trying to stay in a world that's 1400 years old. We're not trying to develop at all. This is wrong. Stop saying things like philosophy is haram. Utilize these sciences so that we develop as an ummah. The intellect is developing. Let's move with it. Salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Again, this was all meant to be one lecture plus another whole section. So I'm very far behind, as usual. I'll finish up, inshallah. I've got 5 minutes left. I'll finish up and we'll continue, inshallah, tomorrow. I was meant to be talking about different dimensions of understanding our religion, and I'm stuck on the intellect, but alhamdulillah, it's a very important point. That's understanding on a grand scale. From the start of time till the end of time. The intellect of mankind is changing, developing, evolving, devolving, whatever you want to call it. But also within one generation, it might be the case as well. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did he come with Islam all at once? Did he come and say, do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this? No. In fact, for the first 10 years, he went really slow. The essence of Islam was first established, then all the particularities came into play. I cannot come all of a sudden and change a whole nation and make them from Bedouin Arabs to the height of intellect. It takes a bit of time. For example, alcohol. If I came and the first thing that I said to them was, you have to stop drinking alcohol, I'm going to limit the number of wives you have to 4, I'm going to be doing it. They were like, take your religion and go to another place, please. But when he came with principles that everyone could relate to, for example, equality between the black man and the white man, equality between the woman and the man, that young lady, that young baby that you're burying, what is her sin? All these things are common, and he built the essence of Islam. From there, he went on. And the alcohol thing, for example, first he said, there's some good in it, but generally it's bad. Then he said, at least in your salah, just don't come drunk. Then eventually he's able to establish it. By the way, imamate and wilaya was formalized when? At the start or at the end? Min kuntu mawla, when was that? At the end. So is this the height of intellect or the prime part of the intellect? Anyway, we'll get to that a bit later, inshallah. Imamate and the Ark of Salvation, we'll get to that. Then there's the universal one, which is man. For example, when a man is young or a woman is young, their intellect is not developed to a stage where Allah burdens them with doing halal and avoiding haram. What's the age for women? 8? You want to lower it or 9? Okay. For women, it's about 9 years old. There's debate about that as well. And for men, it is 15. Also debate about that. Generally speaking, it's around 13 to 15 and maybe 9 and 10. Correct? Does that mean that the intellect of the woman reaches a stage where it can handle what is intellectually difficult at the age earlier than the man? Huh? Of course no. Habibi, you're on that side of the coin. Anyway, the deficiencies in intellect and all of that sort of stuff, maybe it's for another time. But the point is as a young person, we cannot handle the burdens. Allah says in the Quran, لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها. We do not burden a person more than they are capable of. So therefore, when we are young, we need to develop. Okay? So the intellect of the 40-year-old should be considerably higher than a young person. right? Then there's the individual. I'll end with this one. There's the individual intellect. All of us here live in the same time. All of us here live in the same area, and so on and so forth. But is my intellect the same as everyone else's intellect here, or are they different? They're different. So even somebody asked the Imam, every time somebody asks you a question, you answer them differently. He says that's because everyone's intellect is different. For him, this is spiritual. For the other person, that's not enough spirituality, so I give him more. Or, he said in another narration, he says, sometimes I'll say something, and before I finish saying it, that person understands what I'm saying. Because intellectually he is superior. Some people, I have to finish everything that I'm saying at the end, full stop, then he understands what I'm saying. Some people, I say everything, the whole thing, I finish saying it, and then he says to me, can you please repeat that? And I say the same thing again. Then maybe after the second time you'll understand. He's saying everyone's level of intellect is the same. Now question, I'll probably end it here, but question to think about for tomorrow. Are we held accountable all in the same way? Or are we held accountable individually in relationship to our intellect? Remember, our intellect is not just our capacity, but it's also the evidences that we have received. So for example, I have a certain capacity and I have received certain evidences to tell me that, for example, Islam is correct. But I haven't got the capacity, because by the way, our capacity is different in understanding, for example, wilaya, which is why it might have been at the end. I don't have the capacity to accept this Ahlul Bayt business where the Imams are infallible and so on and so forth. Now, will that person who doesn't have the capacity, not that his heart doesn't submit to his mind, but his mind is not yet convinced, will he on the day of judgment be questioned about the imamate of Ali ibn Abi Talib? And if he says, you know what, I did not have really the evidences to prove to me that this was correct, will that person be going to hell, or will he be excused? Ali Kefik Habib. Ali Kefik. We'll get to that. We'll get to that. Inshallah, we'll answer that tomorrow, but I want you to think about this. And I'll end that there. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.